Yeah. All right.
Okay, good evening. The time is now 6:31 p.m. on Monday, July 8th, 2024, and I call this open meeting of the Lexington Select Board to order. This evening's meeting will be conducted in a hybrid format via Zoom. Members of the public can view and participate in the meeting from their devices by clicking on the link posted with the agenda. Please note that the meeting is being recorded. We are also being broadcast live and for future on-demand viewing by Lex Media. All materials provided to members of the board are also available to the public. Members of the board are in person this evening. I'm Doug Lucenti, the chair. On my right is Joe Pato. On his right is Vice Chair Jill Hay. On my left is Susie Barry, and on her left is Mark Sandine. Joining us from staff this evening is Town Manager Jim Malloy, Deputy Town Manager Kelly Axtell, and Select Board Executive Clerk Kim Katzenbach. Our first item for the agenda is public comment. We'll open the floor for general public comment during tonight's session. As we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that we are all neighbors and working together in our community's best interest. I ask that all comments be made with civility and respect and without casting aspersions or references to motives. Open public comments are for items not otherwise covered on our agenda this evening. Public comments are allowed for up to 10 minutes total, and each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. Members of the board will neither comment nor respond, other than perhaps to ask a clarifying question. Remote attendees who dialed in by phone should press *9 to be recognized, or click on the raise hand button in Zoom. If you're joining us in person, please approach the microphone. When you're recognized to speak, please state your name and address and any relevant boards or committee affiliations. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on an item not covered elsewhere in tonight's agenda? Olga. Okay, someone identified as Olga Gutag.
Hi, this is Olga Gutag. I live at 273 Emerson Road in Lexington. I am a former school committee from 2004 to 2007, and I would like you to work with the school committee on looking at the proposals they're putting forth right now. Our serious concern is that the budget is way too high, and also the project, the proposed project for partial demolition and partial retainment of the buildings has not been taken seriously. You know, if I looked at their project, I would not consider it a good way to do it. There are clearly ways to do it, and I know we can do it for a lot less. In terms of sustainability, we don't need to generate all that trash. And I hope, since you approve the money, you will also have some say with the school committee. And I guess you don't control the superintendent, but if you can talk to the school committee about looking for a design that is of substantially lower cost. I know lots of residents, particularly those who no longer have children in schools, would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, seeing no other attendees online or in the room, if you could identify yourself with the microphone, please.
John McKenna, 9 Hancock Street. I just wanted to ask the board to figure out and let us know what plans are for maintaining the islands that were put around the Battle Green. They're full of weeds. And the reason that originally the recommendation had been not to put plantings in there was both to not detract from the Battle Green, but to also know that the DPW works really hard. They don't have enough help to deal with all of these various islands that need to happen. And we've now added 3 in our most important location. So driving downtown, you know, back from the meeting this morning, I saw them and it's like, this is not something we want to greet our town manager with when the candidates come along. So I know you can't answer that today, but I will appreciate an answer as to what the plans are, because they really do need attention. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, seeing no one else online or in the room, we're going to move on to our town manager report. Mr. Malloy, is there a town manager's report this evening other than what was in the packet?
Excuse me. The only other item is that since then, and I did forward the information to the board, is that the library construction project came within the budget. And so we'll be, once the bids are fully vetted, we'll be moving forward with that very near future.
It's great news. Thank you, Mr. Malloy. Okay. We're going to now move on to our select board concerns and liaison reports. Colleagues, tonight we had written comments in our packet from myself. Are there any additional verbal comments from members of the board? Ms. Hay?
I just briefly want to take the opportunity to remind everyone that Lexpress passes are once again on sale and are $20 unlimited passes for an annual pass. And I'd like to encourage people to use Lexpress.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Mr. Pato?
So I want to report that the school building committee met today, went through a lot of material, but one of the things that they wanted to put on the table was a request for a summit meeting sometime as soon as is reasonably possible in July or early August to bring together the school building committee, the select board, the school committee, and financial committees, and the recreation committee, so we can talk through some of the issues that have arisen around the high school project.
Thank you, Mr. Pato. We'll work on that tomorrow, agenda setting, and also figure out again who else needs to be in the room from a discussion perspective, as far as consultants or anyone like that. And of course, as you mentioned, the availability in the summer may be tough, so a remote meeting may be the way we go. Mr. Sandine, I think, no, Ms. Barry? No, okay, excellent. We are going to now move on to our consent agenda, which this evening has 10 items on it. First is to approve and sign an Eagle Scout commendation letter for Amelia Grace Tan. Second is to approve and sign a proclamation for Massachusetts Emancipation Day, also known as Quack Walker Day. This was read, even though we hadn't signed it yet, at a recent ceremony on Saturday. Third is to approve select board committee appointments for the Lexington Housing Authority tenant member seat, Mina Bell, and the Town Celebrations Committee, Yi Fang Gong and David Gravel. Fourth is to approve select board committee reappointments for the Town Celebration Subcommittee, Perla, Whaling, Sotalong. Fifth is to approve the select board committee resignation for the Lexington Tree Committee, James Wood. Sixth is to approve select board meeting minutes from our June 17, 2024 select board meeting. Seventh is to approve water and sewer commitments, the water and sewer cycle 9 billing for $288,452.56. The water and sewer cycle 9 billing for April for $273,142.91. And finally, the water and sewer May finals for 2024, $5,359.54. Our eighth item is to accept drainage easements for 65 Winter Street. Ninth item is to approve a Battle Green use request for the Lexington Minutemen for their 2024 change of command ceremony. And our 10th item is to amend the Battle Green permit for the semi-quincentennial Lex 250 road closure request on Mass Ave, and to add a rain date to that request, which we hope that we don't need to use. The original event is Saturday, July 13th. Do any members of the board wish to have any items removed from the consent agenda to individually consider? Okay, seeing none. Are there any questions from members of the board on any of the items? Okay, I move to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded by I always want to do a roll call vote. I'm still stuck in the days when we weren't all here. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, it is unanimous. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, we're going to move on to our items for individual consideration. Our first item on the agenda is for the board to discuss and vote on the FY 2024 budget adjustments. We're being joined by Carolyn Kosnoff, our Assistant Town Manager for Finance, and Rosalind Imping, our Budget Officer, who will walk us through these very important adjustments. Ms. Barry, before beginning on the presentation.
Mr. Lucente, as my husband is still employed by the town, till the end of the month. Would it be possible to take 2 votes on this and pull out the police salary adjustment?
Yes,
I'd recuse on that. Thank you.
thank you. Ms. Kosnoff.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're here tonight, as you noted, to approve some year-end adjustments to the fiscal 24 budget, which ended on June 30th. As you all know, we approve a budget once a year at the annual town meeting. We occasionally adjust it at the special town meetings. And then as we approach the end of the year, we have one final opportunity to make adjustments before we close the books on the year. There's 4 different types of requests. You'll hear 3 of them tonight. The first is a transfer from the town manager salary adjustment account. These are for things like contractual settlements that were not budgeted for. And so we set aside money in the budget for when those do actually occur so that we can pay retro and then current year increases. We'll also have end of year, which we sometimes refer to as interdepartmental transfers. That could be a flip between a salary and expense line within a department or from one department to another. And then finally, the one that you will hear tonight is a revolving fund authorization increase. Town meeting does set spending authorizations for all of our revolving funds. If we happen to do more business in a year, they often will raise more money, but then in turn, there's usually expenses associated with that. So this is just sort of recognizing that they did more business in a year than we anticipated, and therefore they need an increase. The 4th adjustment is a reserve fund transfer, which is something that we set aside money for in each budget year. We did not need any reserve fund transfers this year. Therefore, the $750,000 that was set aside will revert to free cash at the end of the year. So I'm going to turn it over now to Ms. Rosalind Imping to go through the details that you saw on the summary sheet in your packet. Thank you. If it's all right with the board, I'll go through the year-end transfers, then the salary adjustments and the reserve fund, and then we could come back to the police department at the end, if that works. Great.
Perfect, thank you.
So our first year-end transfer is for property and liability insurance. Insurance rates have outpaced our projections for the past 2 fiscal years. We had budgeted an 11% increase for FY24 over FY23, and then a 15% increase for FY25 over FY24. It's been a lot of major costs in FY24. One of those big costs was the builder's risk policy for the construction of the new police department. So we are looking to move $25,000 from the health insurance account. We have more than adequate funds to do that. We feel that this adjustment will catch us up to where we need to be, so we'll have a solid baseline for budgeting going forward. And the amount is $25,000. Keep moving.
I think go through all of them and then we'll ask questions at the end.
Great.
Thank
Then we'll
you.
move on to the health department. So as the board knows, in FY24, the health department was separated from what's now the Land Use, Housing, and Development Department. It became its own department. To facilitate that change, 2 staff members were regraded to reflect increased responsibilities. Those were not originally budgeted for at the time that the budget was passed. The department also paid a part-time temporary employee to help get the department up and running. This was budgeted for in contract services, but we paid it out of regular wages. So this will not be a recurring expense. This is just for FY24. And so in order to cover this overage, we're going to transfer $9,500 from the department's expenses to personal services. And I will move on to the legal budget, which is under the select board budget. So legal services this year went over budget. That was due to litigation as well as legal expenses related to affordable housing and the Affordable Housing Trust. We have adequate funds in the town manager's budget and in the land use, housing, and development budget to cover this, and we'll split the overage between those 2 budgets. The amount is $96,000. Can I just jump in for 1 second? I just wanted to note, on the legal budget, something that we may want to have as part of the conversation is whether going forward, the Affordable Housing Trust's legal bills should be separated out and paid by the trust, or if we want to continue to leave that in the town's general fund budget, in which case we should probably consider increasing the budget going forward.
Thank you. We'll move on to the town clerk's budget. This year, the clerk's office rented poll pads for voter check-in during elections. They were more expensive than we had anticipated, but this technology did reduce our need for staff. So we have adequate funds in the clerk's election salary budget. We'd like to transfer $15,000 to election contract services to cover this overage. And then we can keep moving to innovation and technology. As you know, our town meeting has gotten very technically savvy over the past couple of years. And so tech support for town meeting from the IT department was not something that we had budgeted for just because it was so new with COVID and everything. And we had been managing this within the IT overtime for the past couple of years, but with overtime for some other projects, the police department and things like that, did push us over budget. So we'd like to transfer $8,000 from IT expenses to cover personal services. And now that we have a few years of data going back, we know what it takes to cover a town meeting, staffing, hours. We're going to be able to start budgeting much more accurately for this tech support in the future. So we're very excited to start with that in FY26, which I can't believe is coming down the line. It's happening. So those are the end of year transfers. I'm happy to take any questions that the board has.
Any questions, board members? Does anyone want to comment, Mr. Sandy?
I had a question for the town manager. Just if you could tell us the status of the Tracer Lane legal. Is that over or is that continuing?
It's over. It's been settled by the city of Cambridge buying the land that was going to be the solar farm. And the other large matter of litigation between the two of them, just so it's clear, was $135,000, and neither of the litigation was really created by us. The other one was a batting cage between two neighbors, and that one recently settled. And we had a meeting just today that we will probably end up splitting a $3,500 charge that the judge is going to make us pay some of the fees that one party had to submit. And so we'll probably be splitting it with the other neighbor. So we'll probably end up paying about $1,700 in a settlement to cover some of their fees, but it's a lot less than if we were to appeal the decision. We would be probably looking at another $50,000 to $100,000 to go through court again. So it makes no sense to do that. So the two big items of litigation are done.
And to your point regarding the Affordable Housing Trust, I do think that's a conversation we need to have as we get closer to our budget cycle. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on it now, but I do think it's, I guess I'd like to hear the appetite of the board to even have the discussion or have the information. Ms. Barry?
A clarifying question, CPC pays their own legal?
Yes. So yes, the Community Preservation Committee does pay their own legal expenses.
Okay. And we have no idea what AHG's legal is going to be, correct? Hard to say.
So I tracked it through March of this year, so it doesn't include April, May, June, but for the first 9 months, so the first 3 quarters, it was just under $12,000. So you can guess it would be about $15,000.
I did take a peek at the more recent bills, and I think that was actually about another $19,000, if I remember
On top of it?
Yeah.
So maybe it's 25 to 30 then.
I think it's a conversation worth having.
Thank you. And Ms. Hayden and Mr. Sandy?
Just to follow up to that, I would also ask entities like LexHab, I believe, pay their legal. And I think it would be worth, when we're having this conversation, knowing which other entities similarly pay their own legal bills.
We actually pay LexHab's bills. They may pay some of them, but we've paid about at least $5,000 in the last year for LexHab's legal bills.
That tends to be for the closing on properties. So if we're purchasing a piece of property, I think we've been paying the closing costs. I think that there sometimes are other legal costs that they may have of their own. But the other thing that, kind of will be coming down the line is when they become, or if they become their own entity, they will at that point be taking all of their legal expenses with them. So that would actually decrease the burden on the town.
Thank you. All right, if you want to continue on.
Sure, we can move on to.
I'm so sorry. Sorry, Mr. Sandine had a question. I did not.
So it's not a question, just a comment about the Affordable Housing Trust. The Affordable Housing Trust hasn't heard that this is being considered, so I think we need to give them some time to have that conversation themselves and be part of this conversation.
Yeah, that's why we're kind of not having the conversation tonight, making any decisions tonight, but maybe as liaison, if you could, more than liaison, you remember, if you could bring it back to them and let them know it's going to be part of our budget discussion for the next fiscal year.
All set. All right, we'll move on to salary adjustments. Just as a little bit of background, the board knows, but every year we put some money into this account as part of the budget, considering contracts that have yet to be settled, some different unanticipated costs related to personnel. So right now in the account, we have $2,773,010. Tonight's adjustments total to $1,070,500. And that'll leave just over $1.7 million in the account. So I will skip police. We will come back to that. And we'll start with the fire department. So we are seeking to transfer $1,030,000 to cover the over budget amount. So in FY23, the fire union contract was settled. The town doesn't build into the budget step increases or salary adjustments that aren't contractually obligated at the time that we pass the budget. And so we did hold money aside for this. Our proposed transfer covers retroactive pay, holiday pay, vacation buybacks, and overtime expenses related to wage increases from the contract. That's $1,030,000. I can move on to the library next. During FY 2024, the library union contract was settled. Those increases were not included in the original budget. We were able to absorb much of those increases, including retroactive pay, but we are requesting a transfer to cover the net overage due to those retroactive payments. So that amount is $25,000. And then last is the select board. We had employee turnover this year, which incurred a vacation buyback. That was an unanticipated expense. And so we're seeking $2,500 to cover that overage. So those are the adjustments, not including the police department. If there's any questions?
No, thank you. I don't see any. Thank you for that. All right, you want to go on to the police?
Would you like me to, or should we do the revolving fund increase first? Up to you.
No.
Okay, great.
I'll let you lead.
So the compost revolving fund this year exceeded projected revenues, which is very exciting. We're thrilled. However, more revenue incurred more expense. That includes sales tax. And so that put the fund over its total spending cap. The fund has an adequate balance to support the requested increase of $65,000, and that would put the authorization cap at $940,000.
Any questions on that, colleagues? I guess this is a good problem to have. All right, if you want to move on to the police.
Let's do that. And so going back to police for salary adjustment, we had several vacation buybacks and overtime that was incurred to cover vacancies. This pushed the department over budget. We were able to absorb a lot of that overage in other personal services line items. And so the net overage we were able to keep pretty low at just $13,000, and we'd like to transfer that from the salary reserve account.
I would just like to note quickly too on this one, when we looked at this back midway through the year, the police department was actually projected to go over quite a bit more. So I do want to thank the chief and his administrative staff that they were really able to manage this down and come in at a much smaller overage than we had originally been projecting through the year. So I wanted to just acknowledge that and thank them for that.
Questions on this one? I would like to add again that when we look at the overtime budgets, the upcoming fiscal year, that we take a deeper dive into what is driving the numbers to go up with overtime and how can we possibly correct that. I know we started down that path with some of the departments, but I think it would be worthwhile because it is a large number that we hold every year.
Sure, thank you.
All right, Ms. Barry, if you'd like to rejoin us, we'll take some comments on this from the public. If anyone has comments that they would like to make on this, please approach the microphone or online. If you could please click on the raise hand button or *9 if you're on a telephone. And if you could identify yourself, and you have 2 minutes.
Pressman, 22 Lucas Ave, member of the CPC. What is the total legal budget for the period that you're discussing?
For the general fund, is that the question?
Yes.
$390,000 is the total legal budget.
So $34,000 was mentioned, 19 and 15. I think that's a reasonable amount for the town to be paying from the legal budget to be supporting that important activity.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, seeing no further comments online or in person, just double check. Colleagues, I'm going to split this into 2 votes. The first is I move to approve and authorize the chair to sign the end of year budget transfers. 5 end of year budget transfers, 3 salary adjustment transfers other than the ones related to the police department, and 1 revolving fund authorization increase as presented in the attached summary. Can I have a second? Moved and seconded. All those in favor, other than Ms. Barry, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Oh, I did it the wrong way. Sorry. Let me revote that. All those in favor, including Ms. Barry, signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, any opposed? I hear none opposed. It is unanimous, 5-0. The second vote is I move to approve and authorize the chair to sign a salary adjustment transfer for the police department budget as presented in the attached summary. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Vote passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rosalind, you did a great job.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to our second item on the agenda this evening, which is for the board to discuss the potential for a summit on sustainable efforts and our historic preservation efforts. This is really just a brainstorming session, and I'm going to ask Mr. Malloy to start us off with this topic, and then we'll have a discussion.
So as the board is aware, we've had a number of residents who have gone to do some sustainability and energy efficiency projects on historic homes, only to find that they run into some issues with either the Historic District Commission or the Historic Commission. And we have a lot of stuff in our bylaws. And one of the discussions we've been having internally is whether or not it would make sense to take some time and put together an ad hoc group that would look at the town's bylaws and how we do things, and whether or not there were some changes that could be made, and have a goal I indicated, either the annual or fall of 2025 annual town meeting. I think we found that when we were working on the noise bylaw that 8 months is maybe not enough, so it might be the fall of 2025. To have that discussion and hopefully to facilitate some sustainable improvements while maintaining the historic look of private properties. And so what I'm suggesting is that the board create an ad hoc committee that would be 1 member of the Historic Districts Commission, 1 from the Historic Commission, 2 from Sustainable Lexington, and then 1 member of the Select Board, to work with our sustainability and resilience officers, so that way you've got 2 people on the historic side, 2 people on the sustainability side, and 1 member of the Select Board working with the staff person to try to put something together and take a look at all the bylaws. So that was that's basically, the thought is, I know we've had some frustrated residents that have contacted me and some of the individual board members. And so it's a way to maybe address some of that and also meet some of the town's sustainability goals.
Thank you, Mr. Malloy. Colleagues, comments, thoughts, feedback on taking this approach of having, an ad hoc committee look at these items? Is it something that folks want to delve into? Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Okay, that was easy. Ms. Hay?
I'm also a yes. I would just ask whether it makes sense to also have someone from Jim Kelly or his department, because some of these issues do revolve around the literal issues of building and the practicalities of whether or not there are alternatives in some cases.
And I would think that Jim Kelly himself would be interested in working on that. He participated in when we had the discussions on the noise bylaws, because a lot of it had to do with construction. He had a lot of input from his experience, so he would probably be good.
Any other comments? Mr. Sandin?
I'm excited about the opportunity. I just I'm reflecting on 12 years ago. I had a number of meetings with the Historic District Commission at the time to talk about this. And at the time, the Historic District Commission was very supportive of this idea. However, the issue at the time and for a while is just who has the time to develop a new set of guidelines and who's going to staff it. So the thing was just sort of stuck in terms of, do we have enough, ability to develop these guidelines in a professional manner? So I think this has been done well in a number of different municipalities, and I've been very encouraged that when I've talked to folks in Historical Commission and Historic Districts Commission, they're very supportive with this idea, but needs to be done carefully and thoughtfully.
Mr. Bannon?
So I support it as well.
Okay, I'm hearing consensus from the board. I do like the idea of Mr. Kelly being involved, given his area of expertise, and he is probably the first person that hears I don't want to say complaints, but the confusion by some homeowners or property owners, I should say. Sounds like there's some consensus. I will take public comment on this, because we do have with us our chair of the Historic District Commission, Mr. O'Shaughnessy. So I'll open this up to any public comment. I'll limit each person to 2 minutes. If you'd like to make a comment, please approach the microphone.
Good evening, thank you. Paul O'Shaughnessy, 61 Ivan Street, Lexington, and currently the chair of the HDC. I would simply, complete agreement. I think we would welcome the input of sustainability on these things. I think this is very much a technologically driven thing, as is evolving as we sit here. We started off 10 more years ago with large, what are known as chocolate bars, the big things that were at the time architecturally rather difficult. And I would say that in my recent experience on the HDC, we have had several applications, and we have been rather liberal about these things, actually. I believe that where there were difficulties, it was that we were demanding from an applicant the same architectural detail that we would ask of a balustrade or a window. And that was the issue, and we asking for some regularity. We started off in our guidelines, which do exist and do speak to this, basically asking that the solar panels be hidden from public view to the extent possible. This works very well if you're on the south side of Mass Ave, but not so well on the north side. To try to mitigate that, we've begun two approaches. One is bringing these into public view, but asking, and the chocolate bars are, I refer to them that way, are much more architecturally pleasing to the eye than they were, say, 10 years ago. But we are also bringing them, but with a regularity and a harmony to the extent possible with the architecture. The other thing, of course, there are now architecturally sensitive tiles that you can get, and we actually did approve. We've approved that actually the tiles in one instance in the Monroe district, although they have yet to be installed because of the difficulty of getting a contractor. I understand. The other is at the church on next to the visitor center.
Mr. O'Shaughnessy, you're at your 2 minutes.
Okay,
I think
very
some
good.
of the details we could.
Absolutely, but we
We can
welcome it
definitely
and we'd very much like to, but we're not inflexible in this regard.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I do have it online. Robert Rockberg, if you could identify your name, address, and any board or committee affiliation. Robert, are you able to unmute yourself?
Co-host, if you want me to try to let him.
Why don't we come back to Robert Rockberg? We'll go back into the room. So you can identify yourself.
Dawn McKenna, 9 Hancock Street. And I just was a little bit confused about the role of the Historical Commission. And the reason I ask is that in the past, there have been some misunderstandings about where their authority is and is not on that commission. And so I just think whatever you write or however you develop it, it's good to have their expertise, but I think it needs to be made clear that that is not part of their role. As you know, I've been in meetings where they've tried to tell people what color they can paint their house, and that's not part of their role. And I think they understand that and appreciate it, but just want to make sure that we're clear about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKenna. Mr. Malloy, did you want? Oh, I thought you were trying to make a comment on that. Okay.
It's just agreeing.
Okay, just agreeing. Okay. Thank you. You can identify yourself.
Wendell Kelso, 25 Summit Road. I'm a member of the Historical Commission. And we do not regulate color of houses and have never imposed that upon any applicant. I'd like to maybe ask the town manager, and to my knowledge, I can't remember in the last decade, an application to the Historical Commission that has involved the addition of solar panels. And so I'm not sure how there would be a complaint about anything on the Historical Commission side.
So energy efficiency is not only about solar panels, it can be more energy efficient windows and other aspects of the house, and that's where we've had some issues.
Okay. One thing that I'd like the select board to consider is that there are basically 3 entities that you're talking about: the Historic District Commission, the Historical Commission, and the Sustainable Lexington. I would think that each one of them to either have 1 representative or each one of them to have 2 representatives would be the most appropriate way. The Historic District Commission is not synonymous with the Historical Commission, and I hope that you understand that, you know, you're dealing with 3 separate entities. I think they should have an equal voice at the table.
Thank you for your comment. Is Robert Rockberg able to unmute? Still has his hand up.
I'm messing.
You can try that. Try to make him co-host, I suppose. Robert, if you could try to unmute. Okay, so we're not having any luck with that. Colleagues, are there any other comments or questions or guidance we want to give Mr. Malloy? Because this would be a committee. It wouldn't be an actual committee. It would be a working group to sort of try to work through some of these concepts to see if it's worth bringing forward some, changes to any of our bylaws or policies. I do think, we have a lot of things changing with the MBTA zoning, and where we change the zoning of the center, we could see more projects. I know that's not necessarily a sustainability issue, but they do have to do them, with environmentally conscious buildings, the way the bylaws are written, all electric, et cetera. I just hope that we maybe can see what the charge is for the group. Because I think we don't want to leave it too broad or too narrow. So maybe in a future iteration, we can see what the work plan of that group is going to be. I think that will help us understand what we might see later on at our table. And I'd rather have that flushed out earlier than later. And I don't think this meeting is appropriate to sort of flush out all the details of what they're working or maybe working on. I think once maybe an initial conversation with the board chairs, and see what's on top of their minds, just so maybe the group doesn't get together and go down a different path that our board is aware of. So I'd love to have our board in line with what the work plan is. Okay. And Ms. Katzenbach, do we have any success? Okay. Apologies to Mr. Rotberg. Doesn't seem like the connection is working. So we're going to move on, colleagues. I think Mr. Malloy heard everything he needed to on that one. We're going to move on to our third item on the agenda, which is for the board to receive an update on the town manager search screening committee timeline. Ms. Hay will walk us through this item.
Thank you. So just to start off, today was the deadline for applications. And as of early this morning, we had over 20 applications already processed through. There may have been some others that came in during the day. I didn't get a later update. I'll probably know the final numbers. We have a search screening committee meeting on Wednesday, and we'll get those numbers then. The committee did give direction to the consultants that we were not hard and fast. Although we had published a deadline, if a wonderful application came in, we were, not looking for process over content. So there may be a little more movement in the number, but at the moment, I'm expecting that we probably will end up with about 24 applications. So as I said, the committee will be meeting on Wednesday evening. We will have an initial sort of review of what the pool looks like in general terms, that will happen under executive session, because even general terms, we're a small enough community. And if you say, we have other managers from comparable towns, and any information whatsoever that's given out can be identifiable. So I did have a conversation with the town council, and we have some pretty strict limits, but there will be some information that we will be able to do, so that the committee is aware of the information aware of the application generally that are out there, but we do not risk the confidentiality of any of the applicants. It's much too early in the process, and we don't want people to pull out from the process because of fear of exposure this early on. So that, and then we will also further be discussing some of the, the content of the next few stages of application. So the next couple of things that happen are that MRI will conduct telephone interviews and do some screening and initial background confirmation work regarding all of the applicants. The committee will select a set of essay questions that will be sent to all of the qualified applicants. We will screen out there, and this happens all the time. A few people will have thrown in applications who simply don't meet our qualifications at all. But all of the qualified applicants will receive the essay questions. They will also be asked to submit work product examples to us, so that we can see not just how they answer a question when they have, they know what it's being evaluated, but we want to see something that they actually produced in their current job. Following all of that, the screening committee will receive the sort of full packet for everybody who completes that second stage. And we've been told that sometimes people drop out at that stage, that they just don't want to do that extra round of work. So for all of the applicants who complete those stages, we will get individual packets. The committee will then individually review all of that, and we will come together again at the end of July to evaluate and make some decisions about who we want to invite in for our screening committee interviews. And goal at this point is to have that pool be roughly 10 people that we would actually bring in person that the committee will meet with. And from that, we would hope to reduce it down to a finalist pool that will come to this board. And at the last screening committee meeting, we had agreed that it would be somewhere in the 3 to 5 range that we would, look to bring to this board. I know this morning we discussed capping that at 4. We also are talking about having the potential of additional panels in between, whether those are citizen panels, staff panels, or otherwise. And we haven't settled on that question yet. It will sort of depend on what the pool looks like after we meet that initial 10-ish group. So that's sort of where we are. And as you all know, there is a hold in your calendars currently during the last week of August for those final interviews. That is our goal, towards which we are working to have that pool ready for you, for us to be able to interview at that time. Obviously, there's a lot of moving pieces between now and then, and a lot of calendars during a high vacation period. So whether that all works, I can't guarantee you, but that's what we're aiming for. So that's where we are. And by the way, it's an incredibly great committee. The people, everybody is really moving mountains to make the possibility to get full attendance at these meetings. And it's been a very collaborative, very thoughtful, very diverse opinion group. So it's really been, I think, one of my favorite committees I've worked on in this town, actually. It's really a wonderful representation of who we are.
That is refreshing to hear, and thank you for the update. I'm glad to see that we are on target and on time for the timeline that we set. Any questions, Ms. Barry?
So I have a question. I'm going to kind of couch this because I know you can't really talk about what's in the pile. But if there is anyone, an internal candidate from staff in that pile, do they go through the same exact process as any external candidate? And so therefore, are we guaranteed we get to interview them or not?
So I will say that
that's something the board
that's
have a say on.
So the board could certainly. So. Well, my first answer is absolutely, this is the same process for everyone. And I think that that's critical on 2 different levels. One is it's our credibility, but additionally for any candidate, we want whoever the ultimate selection is, that person needs to have the imprimatur of authenticity and having earned whatever position they are granted. And if the process is different for anyone in any direction, it calls into a potential question what their authority may be, or what their authority should be, and what their process was. And we want our final choice to have earned everyone's faith and have earned that position. So my initial answer is absolutely, it's the same process for everybody. If the board wishes to, have a say into it, we certainly will know the pool well before we make a final decision of who's in the pile that comes to this board. And I can, in one of my subsequent updates that I will be giving the board, that will become known or could become known if there's an internal candidate or not.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. Okay, we're going to move on to our next item, which is our 4th item on the agenda this evening, which is for the board to have a discussion on the plastic bottle ban policy with regard to municipal departments and facilities. Mr. Malloy, could you start us off on this item, please?
Yes, so there was the meeting I was not at, the board had a discussion and some concern, I understand, about when third-party users of town facilities and rented out or any of our facilities, about what we would be doing as far as enforcing a plastic bottle ban on those private users. And so I modified the policy a little bit to try to address that particular concern, and thought that it might be place where the board could begin to have a discussion about whether that addressed your concern or whether something else would need to address the concern. I also made some other edits to reflect the discussion we had last time, that it wouldn't be July 1st that all departments would submit to the town manager, because it's already July 8th. And then the other change I made was I removed the word use in section 4 so that it would read, each town department shall take all appropriate steps to limit the purchase or sale of single-use plastic bottles. I don't know that we can really regulate use necessarily if somebody's bringing something from home in their lunch bag. And then I changed the word required to expected to act in accordance with this policy. And I also removed the section about all Lexington boards and committees are encouraged to adopt their own plans to eliminate their purchasing and sale of single-use plastic bottles, because if we had everybody developing their own plans and policies and you have 70 boards and committees, that would be a crazy expectation. I know the students wrote this, and as I read back through it when I was doing the red line, I just thought this section is unnecessary.
Thank you, Mr. Sandin. Colleagues, Mr. Sandin, I see you're gunning for it.
So thank you. I also sort of read the number 5 line item about boards and committees adopting plans. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for other boards and committees to adopt plans. My thought, though, was just to eliminate that part about adopting their own plans and just say something. Boards and committees are encouraged to eliminate the purchase and sale of single-use plastic bottles. So the idea being that, yes, staff is eliminating purchase and sale, that committees would also be encouraged to do that. You don't need to have a plan to do that. You can just be encouraged. So from my perspective, that's consistent with the overall intent of the policy.
Mr. Patton?
So I agree with that. It's not a plan, but it's reflect that we want this to apply to committee activities that aren't conducted by staff. And I understand that the change from required to expected for third parties, and I agree with it for now, because it is something that would be awfully difficult for us to regulate and enforce. But I think over time, we probably should transition this from a simple suggestion or expectation into something that is firmer.
Ms. Berry?
So I have a question on the timeline, saying no later than September 1st, and this kind of speaks, I don't know if Ms. Kosnoff can speak to this or not. So we're in a budget year that's already been approved. I don't know. I think we had asked you to go back and do some research and see what was out there and what the cost differential might be. I don't know if you've had a chance to do that. I know I'm putting you on the spot. I apologize.
So I would say Ms. Mancini actually did quite a bit of research into this. There does not appear to be a state contract or anything like that you could purchase things off of, although you can get them off of some of the other things we have like Amazon. They are quite a bit more expensive. I would say that. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head. I just remember being very surprised when she told me how much it would cost to buy a paper carton of water versus a plastic bottle. They are much more expensive. That being said, I think that for most departments, this is not going to be a budget breaker because we don't tend to spend a lot of money on buying water to begin with. For some of the departments that do buy more like recreation, that's something I think that they'll have to evaluate what the cost is. And then, if we needed to do some sort of an adjustment, we could do that, but I don't expect it to be very big dollars.
Thank you. In number 2, I don't know if we actually have purview to require the schools to stop purchasing. Mr. Malone, that's a question for you.
Not really, but I believe they already have. So I think it's a moot point, actually.
Well, I think it might be a moot point, but if we don't have the purview, it shouldn't be in the policy. Right? So I think that should be amended. And then I also think there needs to be some clause in here. I've heard this from both chiefs police and fire, that there are occasions, and even DPW, when they're out working at an incident and they do carry water on the vehicles, in high wet, extremely high temperatures or other situations where they need to rehydrate. And, they've been trying to figure out how that would work and what that would look like. So I think there needs to possibly, in other policies, we have an emergency exclusion. So this wouldn't be a day-to-day exclusion. It would be for emergency situations that would be allowable.
Mr. Pato?
So I think the emergency exception's already there in section 4, where it talks about when necessary to protect health, safety, and welfare.
It also goes on to sub number 4. It says prepare for and respond to an emergency.
Right.
Okay.
I actually want to make a comment, unless, is it referring to the emergency comment? Okay, so I'm concerned about this coming at it from a different perspective. I'm fine with the departments, what we purchase as a town. I have a real concern about how this will look and be perceived in the community at large when it comes to users of our facilities or users of our properties. Okay, I just went through a large-scale event where 18,000 people came on the hottest week of the year outside, ran out of water. Several of us who were selling water, it was just extremely hot. The transition period is unknown to any of the users, right? This wasn't consulted with anyone who actually rents facilities, uses the facilities. So I'm concerned that A, there hasn't been a communication with this. I'm B, concerned that there's been it's going to be a policy that we're not going to enforce. Okay, because the perception, which we always have this issue, the perception is once this passes, we have now no longer allowed to have plastic bottles at town facilities. Okay. People will see that and say, I see plastic bottles. Someone's distributing water at a birthday party that they rented, Hastings Park to celebrate their 5-year-old's birthday, and they're giving out water bottles. That's a concern, because we will, in this community, we know we will have people that say that they're breaking the rule, and we either follow the rules or we don't follow the rules. So I'm very concerned that we're putting up timelines and putting up policies without an intent to enforce them. And again, this goes beyond the bottle of water. This goes to soda bottles, an iced tea bottle, any other plastic. So this is broader than what town meeting passed a couple months back. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the line that says, well, I think I mentioned this, but the town-owned property, again, this really extends to everything. And that would mean perhaps someone rents space over at Cary or Batten Hall, the Cary Memorial Building. They also wouldn't be able to even distribute water. I think we need to do more outreach and either take out the parts about third parties altogether, or because this was also titled as a single-use bottle phase-out policy, but the phase-out is really, we're putting in dates and we're doing it. There's no testing period to see how did this go for the town staff when they did it on their own, and then reevaluate it. I'd rather see something like that. Maybe I'm coming at it as someone who just went through a large-scale event, and I was trying to look at through the lens of how would this have been managed, and I will tell you it would have been slightly disastrous this year. I'm not sure it was going to change drastically in 11 months from now. I think there's again, if this is a drastic change for users of facilities, so I think we have to do a good job of communicating this before we just say this is the policy. Too bad. Anyway. Mr. Sandine, I know you had a comment.
Oh, my comment was just about the schools that the students had told us before that they were planning to approach the school committee with a similar policy.
in a controlled environment like that, fine, let them do it. It's, their building, they control the vendor and all that. I think we're running a risk on our end of creating confusion and creating some resentment and anger. And we've all dealt at this table with policies that we have in place, but we're not enforcing. And it always seems to come back that why did you not enforce the policy that you put in place? Mr. Sandin.
So Mr. Sante, so what would be success from your perspective? How would you know that we've done the proper amount of outreach?
Well, so far we've done zero unless someone can tell me differently. I don't think we've reached out to every user of the facilities we know who uses the facilities. I know they haven't been reached out to get their feedback and perspective. Successful with this would be to keep the policy briefer and more succinct to relate to, our own town department purchasing water for our own town employees. But I think once you go beyond that, I think we have to do more outreach before we just say this is the rule. And I think changing a word, here or there that's not going to cut it, in my view, because it's still going to lead people down. Well, can I do it or not? What is it allowed or is it not allowed? I think it's confusing if you say it's not allowed, but we're not enforcing it. Ms. Hay.
So I actually hear your point, and I'm sort of envisioning something where on one side of Worthen Road, there's a town sponsored event going on, and on the other side of Worthen Road, there's a non-town event going on, and they both are, outdoor on a hot day with teenagers, and one is getting water bottles and one is trying to figure out where there's water available. So I hear what you're saying, and I guess I'm wondering whether there is a way to, I'm not even sure there's a good way to research our way into a solution on this. I mean, if we're going to say the town isn't buying it and other people can bring it in, we're going to have that problem. And if we say nobody can bring it in because we don't want it, we have not done the work to make that clear. And we don't have a means of enforcement. There's no enforcement in this policy. There's no one responsible for enforcement, and there's no consequence. So it's not really an enforceable policy other than a slap on the wrist either. So I think I'm not sure where to go, but I do think there's an inherent issue in the middle.
Mr. Patton.
I think there are at least two things. One is that there is clearly a policy that the town can implement with regard to municipal services. And I don't think that there's, in my mind, any question about that, and we should proceed with that forth.
I'm fine.
Yep. The second dimension is about how third-party users who have permitted use. So these aren't people who happen to be going to a park and bringing their water bottle from home, which happens to either be reusable or plastic. We're talking about people who have rented or permitted for which they needed to have an interaction with the town. So that gives us a touch point where we're able to say our expectation is that we have adopted a no plastic container, single-use bottle, and we expect you to do that. I think that is a reasonable place to be. People who rent places like Cary Hall, who are going to sell water, and we do certainly have people who do that, are already covered by they can't use plastic bottles, right? Because we've already passed that bylaw. So this is a step along the way. And I think it's one that is reasonable to take.
Any other comments?
So I agree with Mr. Pato that we do have that touch point, but I'm still stuck on the how do we enforce it? So you have a Lexington team playing somebody else's team, and let's take it out of the schools for the moment. Let's say it's an adult league. And the other team shows up with a case of water. And the Lexington people are, to your point, upset, and they're calling us and we're getting complaints. What do we do about it?
Very difficult, especially when, the touch point is it doesn't, you can't distribute. It's different than selling.
And
in the plastic, in the bylaw was for single-use plastic water bottles. This is all single-use plastics. It's a much broader.
And my example, the league is the touch point. It's not every individual team. So by the time you've diffused all the way down from whoever signed the permit for whatever the league is down to every single team and every management, or responsible party on each team, I think things get lost also. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do something because it's confusing or hard. I'm just saying we have to think through the practicalities and the realities and be ready to accept those phone calls.
But I think.
Mr. Sandina has hand up.
So
Next.
the thought process about, let's talk about where we agree. We agree that this is something we should be doing for municipal, and I'm hearing consensus about that, and I agree. We should be moving forward on municipal. In terms of the conversation about touch points, about people who are renting or permitting a facility, we do this all the time. Somebody says they're going to bring some food into the community center. We ask them, what's their layout going to be? We ask them who's going to be serving it, where the food's going to be coming from, and a number of things along that lines. We don't have penalties if they don't comply, but we don't have to issue them a permit the next time they come around as well if they're not complying with our rules. So I do think that there's a sort of like a precedent for the way we have rules for how we rent our facilities, and we don't give them penalties if they're not following the rules. We just say you didn't follow the rules last time, and we are concerned about that when you're applying for your next permit. So I think the continued use of the facility is a way to enforce this.
Ms. Barry?
I'm troubled by the fact that there hasn't been the outreach. And for those of you who have sat with me here long enough, you know that typically when I find out there hasn't been proper outreach done, I get pretty miffed. So that's number one. Number two, we don't understand, or I don't think we understand as a board collectively, what happens when those touch points happen. And that's why the timing of this is concerning to third parties, because for us to now almost backtrack, because we don't know what Mr. Malloy's permitting schedule is for Cary Hall. We don't know what the recreation's permitting schedule is for Fields. How far ahead do they permit? We have no idea here at the board. So we don't, in my opinion, we don't have enough information, and we haven't done the outreach to these groups to bring this forward. And you can disagree with me and say that we should force it through, but I think this part with third parties needs some more conversation and some more socialization and more conversation in the community. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest with you. There are still stores giving out single-use plastic bags that shouldn't be, and there's no enforcement. There is a part in the community where people will say, well, I'm here at this park for 3 hours. By the time they call someone and someone comes, we're going to be gone. So why does it matter? And I'd rather it be that people are embracing this rather than kind of thumbing their nose at it, trying to get away with something.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Mr. Pato, and then Ms. Hay.
So I think having reworded it to be expectation rather than requirement reflects on we're not yet going to enforce it, because we are moving in that path, but setting and telegraphing the communication to those third-party users that this community values not generating excess plastic waste. As we have experience with this, as I said at the beginning, I would like us to change that language to be something that is enforceable or something that is firmer. But the language as proposed by Mr. Malloy, for me, creates that window of time during which we are setting expectations rather than having punitive actions.
So I'm going to push back a little bit harder on that. The people in the community, most people aren't going to see it that way. They're going to say, it's here, it has to be enforced, this group or whatever has done something wrong. And that's what happens, because people don't get down into the weeds and dissect all this. So I would prefer that we possibly take that line out and put in there, the select board will be looking at developing a policy that would apply to third party or something, so people know it's on our radar. Because if we're putting something out there that is not going to be enforced, it's going to be more difficult for people to take other things that we bring to them seriously. And it also creates a whole host of havoc and phone calls and emails for the staff. I mean, not just us, for the staff and people out there on the streets doing the work. You know, I'd like people to really buy into this completely and not like, well, you know, peer pressure. I mean, we're either in it or we're not.
So in an effort to kind of pull this together a little bit and go back to your, what I thought was an excellent point, which is that the title of this policy is a phase out. I think perhaps we are all in agreement that we are ready to say for town departments, I'm good with the September 1, assuming
Municipal.
Municipal, because school, right, has their own. Sorry, I was thinking town-wide, but you're right. School has their own policy. So for municipal policy, as long as Ms. Kosnoff has told us that it is not fiscally irresponsible or infeasible, I'm okay with the September 1, 2024 is our, you know, our department's transition date. And then I think that we can do, I would suggest two things. One is that we put something in that says that, you know, all third parties are encouraged to, you know, join us in this effort while we are working on a means of rolling this out to stage 2, which will be 2025 or whatever, however we word that. And then I might go back to this group of students who put this together, and they, working perhaps with the net zero group, could come up with some catchy signage in the same way that the bicycle safety group came up with those fun little signs with the Minutemen on bikes for the bikeway. Something that said, you know, what are alternatives to single-use water bottles or sports drinks? How else could you rehydrate while using our fields? Something like that. I don't know, but we could ask them to think through. They came up with the policy. They may be able to come up with a good way of helping us spread the word, particularly in the locations where it's going to be relevant. What are the places that get rented by third parties and where this might be used? It's at least worth asking them to brainstorm it, would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think there's multiple levels of complexity here, depending on, I think the easiest for us is the departments that we control.
Mm-hmm.
It gets more complicated with the users, and then it gets more complicated with the guests. And I'll use guests as like an event, you know, random folks coming off the streets to an event that's open to the public. That's where it really gets difficult in my view. So, you know, we also need to do some work on how can we make events more accessible for water? This got brought up at a recent 250th meeting of, you know, the MWRA allows you to rent their truck, but it's one truck and it's booked a lot of the time. So, you know, we have to figure out how do we make beverages accessible, water beverages particularly. So anyway, I'm going to take, I think we have some consensus, but I do think this is worth having some public comment on, because I did see someone with their hand up earlier. So they're back on. So I'll first take online. Laura Swain has her hand up. If you could identify yourself, name, address, and you'll be limited to 2 minutes.
Hi, excuse me, I'm Laura Swain. I live at 29 Locust Ave. in Lexington. And I think that it's quite clear that the town, the municipal departments can implement this quite easily. They, need to come up with policies that of how each of them can do it. I laughed a little bit when the cost was discussed because as you all sit there with your reusable water bottles, the purpose of the policy is to encourage people to bring reusable water bottles. So the cost should be close to minimal. It's really a cost of publicizing that this department now will not be providing water. Users need to bring it in their own containers. For example, town elections, lots of times water is provided for the volunteers at town elections. So, okay, people who coordinate the volunteers need to remind them, bring your own water bottles. Or we'll have a large jug or something like that, or give you time to go back home to get water or something like that. I guess I see very little cost. I think that it would be wise to include something in the policy, as someone suggested, that, hey, in the future, people who obtain a permit to use our facilities will be expected to comply. So you might start thinking about how to do that. That's all.
Thank you for your comments. If you could identify yourself.
Don McKenna, 9 Hancock Street. So what I'm struggling with on all of this is that we don't really know what the unintended consequences are of this. I think we know that town meeting has made it very clear that we want to work on reducing the plastic bottles. But so I have a suggestion. What if instead of making any of this policy right now, what you do is you ask every department to do some data collection for you over the course of the summer through September when school first opens, and see if you could get the school department to do the same, to say, what are the events and occasions and meetings and whatever else there are in which single-use water is used, and whether it's plastic bottles or people are doing other things, so that you have an idea. Because just sitting here, I was thinking, we've already heard from fire, police, and DPW that that's a problem. Town meeting has been using single-use plastic, but I think that's something we can easily cure. But what about recreation? They run all those summer camps. We heard from Mr. Lucenti about what happened at the carnival this week. Visitor services, what about all the events that happen there? I don't think we really understand, and I want to be supportive of going forward, but I have a real concern that if we don't do any data collection, this policy, even as you talk about it just being town departments or municipal departments, a lot of the municipal departments already we know that there are issues with, and I think you'd be better off figuring it out, understanding, and then maybe in October coming back with a policy that does as much as we can based on that data. So that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to also just clarify for everyone listening, where this policy has extends to any plastics in any bottle, not just water. We now have Lynn Jensen with their hand up.
Oh, hi. Thank you for letting me speak. Lynn Jensen, town meeting member, precinct 8, 133 Reed Street. I appreciate this discussion. I just want to state that I'm not sure the students are here today. The proponents of the team, Environment team, spent a whole year doing outreach. I think they presented last time, maybe 2 meetings ago. They talked about all the outreach, a different department they talked to. So I think if they heard that they did zero outreach, they will be a little bit disappointed. So they started the fall last year and talked to different departments in town, including the school, fire and police and facilities. So I think I just want to remind everyone that they have reached to different departments, including Mr. Malloy, the town manager. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing is that when we talk about banning single-use plastic bottles, I don't know, everybody is aware that a lot of cans are being replacing the plastic bottles. So at school, we serve thousands of students every single day. Since food service has voluntarily switching halfway to selling less plastic bottles, water bottles, and less drink bottles, or more in cans, it has been a success. So I think people are not going to go thirsty by drinking from various drinks from cans or aluminum bottles. So I think that would solve a lot of people's fear. And also we have big events for 300 staff at high school, and we have big tank of water, and everybody use their own bottle or cups, and nobody was thirsty. So I think it's just a new way of doing things, replacing cans, aluminum with the plastic. So you can still sell single-use drinks, just in a different container. And
Lynn,
enforcement.
Lynn, your time is up. Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Okay, colleagues, I think we had a robust debate. I just want to see where we're at this point. Sounds like we have some consensus on the departmental piece and less consensus on the third party piece. Mr. Pato.
So I agree with your assessment. I think Ms. Hayes' proposal to adjust the language for third-party use to reflect our intention to move that way would be acceptable in the short term as a compromise.
Mr. Sandin?
I would be fine with that as well.
Ms. Berry, do you want to comment on that, or Ms. Hay?
I'd want to see the language.
I would agree with that. I would like to see the language. Where this is a town manager's policy. Would this be a town manager policy, Mr. Malloy, or would this be a select board policy?
It would be a select board policy.
Okay, I thought at the beginning of this, we were talking about it as a town manager policy.
If it were just town departments, then it could be a town manager policy, but I think where it would extend to the third parties, so it could actually, I guess, start off as the way you're discussing it right now, it could start off as a town manager's policy, and then if it goes beyond that, then the select board would need to adopt something.
So I'm not I'll just leave it with, I'd like to see the language if I'd like to see this revised. We'll bring it back. Based on the comments that were made today. Mr. Malloy, is that?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Pato.
And the only thing I'd like to add to that is I'd like for the municipal departments to proceed on this timeline, even if the language isn't finalized by the board before September.
Next meeting.
Yeah. All right. I think we're going to move on from this unless there are further questions or comments on this item from the board members. We're going to move on to our fifth item. Am I right? Yes, sir. Our fifth item on the agenda this evening, which is for the board to review and potentially approve a conduct and decorum for public meetings policy. So the conduct and decorum for public meetings policy establishes guidelines for maintaining an orderly and respectful environment during public meetings and attempts to ensure compliance with recent Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court rulings. This was initially presented on December 18th, 23. The select board had requested that revisions incorporate additional feedback and align with other town documents. So Mr. Sandin and I drafted the policy emphasizing public participation and decorum And we also worked with the town clerk, who provided feedback to try to incorporate the policy or language that's used in the town clerk's board and committee handbook. So we were attempting to create sort of a hybrid of, let's have one document that covers public meetings. Heard some concerns today by email. So just to be upfront with what those concerns were, the first was to change language inside the document. There's a sentence that says a specific time for public comments should be designated, typically allowing 2 minutes per speaker. The feedback on that from some was that, well, not everybody does 2 minutes. You know, how is that typical? You know, some do 3, some don't have, have longer limits. They want to have more in-depth commentary from the public. So the suggestion was to change it to a specific time for public comments should be designated, including a time limit on speakers, rather than saying the number of minutes, so that the chair could suggest their own number of minutes. We have chosen 2. We chose that a couple of years back to try to be more efficient with our time. So that was one piece of feedback. Another piece of feedback we received was a misunderstanding or not understanding the term or phrase "no viewpoint discrimination." I think that was more intended for the chair of the meeting rather than the individual who's speaking at the meeting. We don't want chairs to be discriminating. So I'm not going to let you speak long because I don't like your viewpoint, but I'm going to let you speak all day because I do like your viewpoint. So that's, and maybe the language we can change there to say the chair shall not or should not discriminate on viewpoint. And then there was another question that had come up, whether town council had reviewed this. To my knowledge, town council did not review this version that was in the packet. I think town council reviewed a previous version, but it was 6 months ago, and I frankly can't remember. And we've changed it substantially to try to merge it with the town clerk's information. So I don't think that would hurt to have town council view it and give feedback. But that's sort of where we are at with this policy. Any comments or questions from the board at this point? Mr. Pato and then Ms. Hay.
So I think I would like to retain a suggested time limit rather than leaving it unspecified. And the reason is, it is really important for chairs to recognize that they have to enforce the times uniformly for everyone. And they have to give that expectation to the public in advance. Otherwise, we could run afoul of both interference at meetings and being viewed as being discriminatory. So it's not just a topic, but that you are only allowing people you know or like to speak. And in the absence of having established that clearly, it can be viewed as being capricious. So, and while I think that giving chairs the guidance that there is a minimum and target amount of time for general comments, which is different from people who are engaging on a particular topic. You might have invited somebody from the public to come and inform the committee about a particular issue. This is all about unsolicited public comment.
Well said. And I think that is a big distinction in this. The chair does have discretion when they've invited someone who's not on the committee to speak. Ms. Hay, you had something to add?
So I had a couple of comments. One, I was thinking in a different vein. I was actually thinking, given that we do things like during town meeting season, we sometimes limit from 2 minutes to 1 minute in order to get through our comments and our meetings and get over to town meeting. So not having something specified actually allows for that kind of flexibility. So I hear what you're saying, Mr. Hadow, but I think also that if experience is consistent, that we are using the same period of time, that we announce the amount of time that will be allowed and we enforce it uniformly, I feel less of a necessity to put a hard number into print, I guess. And I like having the ability, and it may be that we're doing something that's incredibly complicated with a lot of input, and we want to extend it to 3 minutes in the same way that we occasionally have needed to limit it to 1. So I kind of like that flexibility.
You say, just to be clear, you like the flexibility of taking the 2
Of
minutes
taking
out.
a number out, yes, and saying that, it's, I forget exactly what the wording was, but that it will be, where was it? Do back up here.
Typically allowing.
Typically, okay. But I think that keeping it that, I'm looking for the rest of the sentence. Where was it? Which section was it under?
Application 3.
Great, thank you. So specific time for public comments should be designated. And you could even put in there, and allocation per speaker will be announced at the beginning of every meeting. Something like that. Which I think leaves us and future us the opportunity to use what is appropriate. If we put 2 minutes in, then I think we're more bound one way or the other. But that wasn't where I was going. That was just in response to Mr. Pata. The 2 things I wanted to say were under 3 application and 3D, where we say that the civil tone of voice should be maintained at all times. Technically speaking, I believe under Collider, we don't have the right to maintain, to require that. So I think it's reasonable to say, we could say we expect, we request, something like that. But I don't know that you can actually say should, because they do unfortunately have the rights to yell at us if they wish to. And then under E, I would also say, rather than invite people to argue whether something complies with constitutional protections or not, I would simply say where appropriate, rather than where, provided it complies with constitutional protection. Means sort of the same thing, but it doesn't set up the argument against us. Right? You don't argue against yourself. So I'd say, may result in removal, provided it disruptive behavior, including interruptions and personal attacks, may result in removal where appropriate.
Okay. Yes, and I think that's fair to make it shorter, less words. In fairness to Mr. Sandine, we try to make this as few words as possible. But
and I'm grateful for the work you guys both put into this.
Trying to add in the town clerk's language from the document in page 17 was a bit of a challenge, because it was more generic about how we treat each other, which doesn't necessarily translate in how someone might treat us who's speaking, which they can say whatever they want. I think this is really trying to keep everyone in the same even playing field, where the person speaking to us can say whatever they want.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't
necessarily mean we want to escalate it by saying whatever we want. Of course, Mr. Sandine and then Mr. Pato.
So Mr. Lucente proposed some language to address this 2 minutes per speaker. One of the things that I'm thinking about is, and I'm sure all of you have experienced as well in your liaison activities, is that many different committees have very different perspectives on how long they'd like to hear from the public, right? Some committees have extended periods of time where they allow the public to speak, and they feel that's a reasonable approach to their deliberation. And so they're concerned that establishing a 2-minute limit would actually shut off that sort of that valuable deliberation that they would like to have as a member of their committee. So they feel like it would be hamstringing their ability to operate as a committee. So I'm with Ms. Hay on not having a specific limit because of that reason. I'm thinking, so Mr. Lucente proposed language that says typically including a time limit per speaker. thinking about Mr. Pado's concerns, what if it said typically including a consistent time limit per speaker as a way of addressing the concern?
Mr. Pado?
So my concern is that I've actually participated in meetings where there have been disruptive individuals who are recognized where the committee did not have an explicit standard, and as a result was not able to effectively terminate the conversation. So if you have an unbounded or a long period of time, you have just said this committee is willing to be hijacked for 10 minutes. Because that's the standard we use for people who are speaking to us. Arlington has a 7-minute time limit at their town meeting. And not to pick on our neighboring town, but I have observed interesting conversations. So it's having the time limit in place allows you to say, if you are disrupting our meeting in content at the end of this time, you're not being recognized again. And we've given you the constitutional requirement to be able to address the committee, but you are abusing it, and you are, by our rules, which we have made clear, you're done. So that is why I favor a shorter time. I took to heart the word typically because I assume that some committees may choose their typical might be 3 or 4 minutes, but I would caution against going very long in any explicit time, because you're now creating that harassment window. And one other comment, since I just have the mic for the second, one of the things about this whole document is that it is a merger of a policy and what had been a set of guidelines and instructions for committees for their discourse. So the portion that talked about, civil tone of voice, that really was guidance to the committee members for how they should engage with each other or the public. And the way this is set up right now, it's a little awkward to read and understand the distinction.
Yeah, we can definitely clear that up. I agree with you. That's a good point. So we sounds like we got some good feedback. So the 2 takeaways are we're gonna do some edits. I just wanted on the 2-minute versus not 2-minute. I'm more inclined to put a number in there than not. So, and I hear 2 that don't. So Ms. Berry, it's up to you.
I would take it out.
Take it out. Okay, we will change the language and maybe we'll use the word consistent.
And
limit.
I would put in that it, something about announcing it, that a time limit to be announced at the beginning of the meeting, something, that you have to state it clearly up front, I think has to be in there.
And the other suggestion, we'll run this by town council just to make sure that, given it is the nature of the policy, it's about individuals' rights to speak publicly. We want to make sure we're doing everything on the up and up. So the goal with this was and will be to have this put forth in the handbook and also put it in our policies. So if you'd like to speak on this.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure, Bob Pressman.
Identify, so thank you.
22 Locust Ave, member of the CPC. A couple of points. It says this policy applies to all meetings conducted by public bodies. The Lexington Housing Authority is a public body. The town meeting is a public body. 2 committees are not appointed by this board, but by the moderator. The CPC is established by statute. I don't see how this policy could cover those groups. More importantly, both what you say at the beginning of meetings about the 2 minutes and what is in this document is not consistent with the SJC case, where town council in his first paragraph to you of guidance says the court said civility restraints on the content of speech at a public comment session at a public meeting are forbidden. Discourteous, rude, disrespectful, or personal speech about governmental officials and governmental actions is constitutionally protected, and I'll leave out the last sentence. So if you think of the first session for abutters that the trust had, there were people who were making public comments and they weren't civil and they were disrespectful, and other people disagreed, and we all lived happily thereafter. I was at a meeting with Ms. Sokola, and she was hearing different people, and a person referred to invaders in the shelters. And what happened was that everybody there stated different things. She stated a different position, and we all went home safely. So I think that the policy, I think that just to say, finish my sentence, just to say that you're complying with the Constitution without informing people who don't know what you're talking about isn't really adequate.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, appreciate that, everybody, and we'll put a little bit more effort into the next and hopefully final draft. Mr. Sandin?
Can I just say what I wrote down, typically announcing a consistent time limit per speaker?
Take out typically. You have to announce the time.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to move on to our sixth and final item on the agenda this evening, which is for the board to discuss and review and hopefully approve the Lex 250 recommendation for dignitary invitations. The Semi-Quincentennial Commission has prepared a report outlining the recommended dignitary invitations for the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington for April of 2025. We received some extensive community feedback gathered through public listening sessions, online comments, and we're attempting to ensure that the event reflects a diverse set of views of our Lexington residents. The report emphasizes the importance of inclusivity, historical significance, and diplomatic relations to ensure a diverse and enriching celebration. The report also highlights Lexington's tradition of inviting dignitaries for significant historical milestones, showcasing our town's role in the history of America. The report and recommendations were approved unanimously by the Semi-Quincentennial Commission on June 26, 2024. So the board is being asked tonight to review the list of recommendations and vote on the invitation list. Hopefully colleagues got a chance to look at the list, look at the report, some of the highlighted things that weren't sort of discovered until much later was, exactly who did we invite in 1975 and who actually showed up, which was very, I think only one of the dignitaries at the national and international levels showed up. So anyway, the Semi-Quincentennial Commission spent a fair amount of time going through this, and the commission ultimately went with the more rather than the less idea. So comments or questions, Mr. Pato?
So I want to express my thanks to the commission for this report. I think that it helps set context for what the community has done historically, which was not something that I was familiar with. I certainly was familiar with the last 75 years, but this going back and positioning how the town has reached out and made higher level invitations going back for the past 150 years was very helpful to see. I personally still would prefer a less expansive set of invitations, but I can see how this remains consistent with past practice, and for me, it seems like a reasonable thing to do.
Thank you, Mr. Pato. It was bit of a discovery looking through this, of course, and finding the history part. And ultimately, I think what we all realize is that the extending the invitation as a courtesy, most of them aren't going to make it, and we're not paying for anyone to come out. So if we were hosting a party, we're not paying for all the attendees and flights and hotels and all that. Except for we've agreed to do some host at our last board meeting, some hosting for the delegation from Antony, France. Ms. Barry.
Just to add some further context to this, I will say this list very much mirrors what Concord's list is, and their invitations have already gone out. And just a point of clarification for anyone who's reading this report, if you make it all the way to page 9, the invitation sits with the office. This does not, none of these invitations sit with the actual person. And in fact, some of the names on here are not accurate since this was written a few weeks ago. So
How quickly things change.
Evolving.
Mr. Sandine or Ms. Hay? Mr. Sandine first, then Ms. Hay.
So as Mr. Lucente mentioned on the previous thing, I'm often on the less is more category, I think. So I was struck by the historic view of this from 1975 to 2025 when sort of counting the number of folks that are being invited. And we're looking here at not just more, but twice as many. So I'm, as I mentioned before, I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea of inviting so many folks. I wonder why we would be inviting all former presidents, all former governors, all former vice presidents. It doesn't, to me, I expressed my concern about that before. I still remain that concerned. I think that this is an event for the people, and the more sort of dignitaries that take it over, I think it takes away from the thing rather than making it an event for the people to celebrate the 250th. So that's where I am on this. I'm a less is more.
Ms. Hay and then Ms. Barry.
So I will say I was struck by the length of the list. But as I read through the list, I actually think it's a very thoughtful list on multiple levels. First is that it sort of honors and acknowledges the history. It honors and acknowledges our community and the ties that we have from Lexington, Massachusetts, and the United States to this event. So I'm actually comfortable with the recommendation as it sits, and I'm grateful for the work that went into it, the thoughtfulness that went into it, and in particular, as Mr. Pato said, the sort of the history and the framing that helps us reach this. So I'm grateful and I'm supportive.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Ms. Barry?
I just wanted to add one little advertising note here. I know at this table there have been some concerns raised about security for this potential event and what this invitation list might mean for that. At this week's Lex 250 meeting, which will be on Wednesday afternoon at 4:30 in a hybrid format, we are hearing a presentation from MEMA. That if any of you want to, log in and watch that, it will be, I think, towards the beginning of our agenda. It is certainly worth the watch to understand the efforts that are going on kind of, excuse me, down in the weeds behind the scenes to make this a safe event for everyone. And I had another comment, which I lost.
I think I remembered it for you.
Okay.
I think the comment might have been, often we won't know who's coming until 2 weeks. And there's also the potential that someone will come that we didn't actually invite, but they're here and they want to show up. Ms. Barry, so I knew I triggered it.
Yeah, you did. So actually, all these people, we're inviting them to come and participate and, really live the experience that we live year after year on the most glorious day of the year ever. And if they're not all speaking, they're not all participating in everything. If there is a high-level dignitary, there will be a slot for that one person to possibly make remarks if they want to. This doesn't guarantee anyone anything. And as Mr. Lucente did say, we're not paying for flights, we are not paying for meals, we're not paying for hotel rooms. And if they're high enough up, they come with their own security. So.
Okay, comments or questions? I'm hoping we have a vote tonight. Comments and questions from members of the audience. State your name and address.
Don McKenna, 9 Hancock Street. And I too really appreciate the work that was done to come to what I think is a good, balanced view of all this. I just had one question, and I may have missed it. Are you planning on inviting the former selectmen? And I'm not talking so much about me, because of course I'm here and I'll be here, but several of them no longer live in the area. And we've always had them as part of the ceremony. So if it's not on there, I would suggest that that's the one thing that I noticed that wasn't on there that is part of our typical approach. So thank you.
Thank you. It is not on here, and I think for the local list, I think we took the lead from what they did in 1975, but I don't see a problem with.
So from another historical context, since this wasn't in the report, I will say, I believe it was the Patriots' Day after 9/11. We invited all the former select people and former town managers to participate in the parade, and we had a very good showing that year. It was kind of just a show of community involvement.
Not opposed to it. If anyone else is opposed to inviting former select board members, selectmen. Mark, it adds more.
They're local.
But they're local, yeah.
Potentially.
That was what I was saying. It's for the local folks.
Yeah. All right, I'm seeing no further questions or comments from the board. I am going to make a motion, Mr. Sandine.
So I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've been putting into this, and I appreciate that all the thought that's gone into it and all that kind of thing. I am in the less is more category, but so I don't need to, I don't want to vote against this. I would prefer just not to vote.
You can certainly abstain if you'd like. Yep. So I'm going to make a motion that the select board approve the recommendation of the Semi-Quincentennial Commission to invite dignitaries to the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington as outlined in the attached report. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. And any abstentions? So we have 4 in favor and 1 abstention. Motion passes. Before we adjourn, I'd like to announce the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Select Board will be held Monday, July 22nd, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. via hybrid participation. I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes 5-0. We are adjourned.